Many of you have heard of iGuard. Hopefully many of you have also heard of Quintiles. Quintiles is actually the company that sponsored the development of iGuard. And if we go back in time to 2007, we basically look at the challenge that we thought about as a company. So a little bit of background for those that don't know. Quintiles is the largest provider of contract research services to the pharmaceutical industry. You know, the bulk of the research that we do involves companies developing products and basically coming to Quintiles to run clinical trials. And we recognise, winding the clock back 2-3 years, that really the focus of doing successful drug development and successful trials was actually starting to get in touch with the patient, understanding some of the challenges associated with recruitment, and ultimately identifying and mobilising patients to participate in research. So basically, if you wind the clock back to 2007, we looked at two problems. Number one, how do we improve medication safety for patients? And this was at a time when there was a lot of discussion around safety of medications that were out there in the marketplace. And at the second point in time, how do we build a community of patients for clinical research? And we discussed a lot of different possible methods. Do we go disease specific? Do we go light touch? Do we go heavy touch? At the time, Facebook was kind of taking off and everybody was going to be talking to each other through Facebook and so on. And ultimately the concept that we came up with was iGuard.org, Safer Medicine, Healthier You, and I'll give you a little bit of a background to it. So the idea started in October 2007. Basically, we created, at the time, a medication monitoring service, and over the 3 years that have passed since then, iGuard has grown to be the largest medication monitoring service, and at the same time, the largest patient-centric research platform in the world. So we launched in October 2007. We desperately hoped that we'd have 10,000 people by the time we got to Christmas of 2007. Our plan was to hit 100,000 people by October of 2008. In fact, we hit 100,000 people by February of 2008. We hit 1 million patients by the end of the year, and the number has continued to grow. So basically, each week that passes, we're enrolling between 7,000 and 15,000 new patients every week into the service that we offer. So what do we actually provide? To a certain extent, we really started and said, look, if we want to develop a pool of patients that we can work with for research, we need to actually offer patients something up front. And ultimately, I think basically back to what we saw that Novartis had done, the key to actually doing anything successful is actually doing something because you want it to be good for patients. If you actually want it to be good for what's going on, then good things will happen. So we started off basically with a service that provided free medication safety checks, rapid medication safety alerts and recalls, and access to feedback from thousands of other patients. So a patient registers with iGuard, they get a drug safety report looking at drug interactions, both drug disease interactions, and anytime there is an alert or a recall involving their product, they get sent an email basically with a summary of the recall and what it actually means. The other thing which we do is regularly we reach out to patients that participate in the iGuard community, and we ask them questions about the drugs that they're taking, side effects, so on, and basically build up a longitudinal pool of information. But at the same point, actually mobilise patients to participate in research. So basically, well, what have we really done since then? We've got 2.5 million people that have registered for the service. We've collected longitudinal treatment satisfaction questionnaire for medications data from over 300,000 patients and still collecting. To a certain extent, we're running registries for hundreds of products and conditions. I mean, particularly when you're looking at major products, we've got tens of thousands of people that have been on those products and that we're following longitudinally. We're getting life-saving feedback from patients. I mean, patients write in every single day basically going, hey, this is great information. I didn't realise that this side effect could have been caused by this particular medication. I went to my doctor, I changed things. I'm now up and about, I'm moving. The feedback that we get daily is really overwhelming and very positive. And that translates in how we actually use the community. Between 11 and 25% of patients that we reach out to for a research activity actually respond within 24 hours. Which is huge when you kind of look at any other kind of metric of patient engagement or user engagement in traditional market research panels. Why? Because we have a relationship with these patients that's actually trusted. The other thing which we have which really surprised us we've got a 97% response rate after 18 months. And so what that basically means, when I reach out to patients, say, and I just looked very quickly, it was topical to talk about cystic fibrosis. We've got about 1,300 patients with cystic fibrosis that have actually registered for the service. And what we've basically found is if you reach out to patients that registered a year and a half ago exhibit about 97% of the response rate of a patient that's registered in the last 3 months. So we still get high level of user engagement from patients that have registered a while before. A little bit of a summary. Patients join and hear about iGuard through a number of different channels. Number one is referral through Quintile's partner sites. And again, touching on where pharma has a lot of opportunities in this area. We recognise as a company, Quintiles works with thousands of physicians around the country and around the world. Why not actually mobilise those clinics for actually starting to introduce patients to the service? So that's what we do. We've focused very much on outreach in Quintile's clinical clusters. So those are geographic areas where we actually conduct a lot of our research. And referral through iGuard's API partners. And this is kind of where the excitement really has happened for us. Healthcare providers, hospitals, pharmacies, e-prescribing platforms, patient advocacy groups. It's something that I was chatting to Kevin about a few months ago when we were sort of talking about how iGuard started up. If you wind the clock back to October 2007, I had no idea how we were going to go and get patients. And we tried pretty much everything. I think the strategy, as I'd describe it, is picking up a whole bunch of spaghetti and throwing it in the wall. We did everything from having people with t-shirts walking down the street in New York City to putting ads on Google to supporting patient advocacy groups to be reaching out to their membership. I mean, if we tried 50 or 60 different strategies, I would be underestimating. And what we learned very quickly was what was either working and what wasn't. A few things that we learned that I think are really important takeaways. Number one, light touch. We've seen a lot of communities trying to really engage a user up front. The challenge with that is you've got to offer somebody a lot of value, a lot of trust to get somebody to mobilize to begin with. Why not turn around and say, here's something light that I can offer you. So in our case, do you wish to get safety alerts and recalls on your medication? We learnt 7 out of 10 patients when asked that question go, yeah, why not? So provide something small up front that people can engage with, and then once you've developed a relationship, once you've registered the user into your community or into your work stream, then continue to follow up with that user in a way that continues to build trust and build engagement. And sometimes that's a more effective strategy than trying to offer something really great up front, but that sees a larger gap for the patient to take up. So a whole lot of different things. The other thing which we learnt too, one of the things which is interesting to me about health, when it comes to drug safety and when it comes to patients' health, very often it's high importance but low engagement. And what do I mean by that? If I went to this room and said, how many people are interested in getting safety alerts and recalls on their medication, most people would turn around and say, yeah, of course I'm interested in that. I would want to be informed. And yet, very few people would go home and actually register with the service. What we've worked out is it's absolutely critical that you try to get people to engage and make some kind of decision at a critical point in their workflow. So when you're being dispensed Lipitor at the pharmacy, do you wish to get safety alerts and recalls on that medication? At that moment in time, yes, register the patient. So it's key to actually getting that engagement happening at a critical point in the workflow. And that makes the difference between getting 10 times the number of users compared to what you would do otherwise. Just to give you a little bit of a sense, this data is already a year old. Since putting together the slide, I've updated it. But in fact, pretty much most of these numbers are increased by about 50 or 60%. But we're tracking, we're tracking 250,000 patients with migraine, in fact, about 40,000 patients with epilepsy, even things like genital herpes that you think are not things that people would actually put online. We're tracking about 7,500, 8,000 patients with that. And actually in February of this year, we launched iGuard in the UK. We're getting close to 50,000 patients there. And in France, Germany, Spain, and Australia, actually later this month, we're launching. A lot of what we've actually done with iGuard in the US, we've learned has got a lot of application outside the US market. Just a little bit of discussion on how we're actually using that. To a certain extent, what I've seen over the last 3 years in this sort of health 2.0 space has been a lot of discussion about building communities and applications and so on. But there hasn't been a whole lot of discussion about how these communities are actually useful in improving medical care from a back-end perspective. And these are really three things that we've done a lot of, and it's actually been on the success of these that we've decided to expand what we're doing into other countries. First of all, protocol feasibility. Many of you that are familiar with drug development would know that the development of a drug requires multiple studies. Each study actually has got a protocol, i.e. these are the particular types of patients that need to be involved in the study. This is what's going to happen as part of the study. These are the tests that are required. This is the follow-up that's required. One of the big challenges that we've seen, very often clinical researchers develop a protocol to be scientifically very accurate, but in the absence of understanding the patient environment, they make assumptions about the number of patients that actually exist with a particular disease that may be available for research. So I'll give you an example, migraine. Someone can do a study and say, okay, well, 10% of patients in the Philadelphia area experience migraine every year. So if I could do a migraine study and be very successful at recruiting patients. But then when they look at the inclusion-exclusion criteria, they say, in fact, I really need to have people that are experiencing, say, more than 5 migraines a month, and patients whose migraines aren't helped with immediate therapy in the first, say, 12 hours. At the moment, it's very, very difficult to test what impact that actually has on your recruitment. And what we've been able to do now systematically, we've done this for over 200 studies to date, is actually reach out to patients that experience migraine, actually understand what the normal distribution of migraine episodes per month actually is, what impact changing the inclusion-exclusion criteria actually have. And in a number of cases, we've actually used that feedback on studies that weren't recruiting well to understand actually why the study was not recruiting well, and be able to go and impact the recruitment for those studies quite dramatically. In one particular case, in a CNS indication, by a factor of 10 times, just by actually understanding some of these study dynamics. From a recruitment perspective, we're also using the patient population for what we call quick start. And again, just to put some of the statistics in context, once you start a study and you activate a physician to be an investigator, it takes on average about 8 weeks for that investigator to screen their first patient. And that's just because the timing of when you started up the doctor's site may be very different from that doctor's site's own workflow. They might be going out on holiday, there might be a lot going on at the clinic. What we've been able to do is actually mobilise patients that are located near that doctor and actually get the patients to that doctor's clinic within a week of that site being activated. And what we've seen from doing that, by actually getting the site working, getting them to read the protocol, getting them to handle the study drug, getting them to screen a patient, actually increases not only the upfront enrolment in the study, but the sites have a better initial experience, and their subsequent downstream recruitment for the study actually goes up quite dramatically. The other thing which we've actually done a lot of now is in the observational research area, patient-reported outcomes, particularly for for comparative effectiveness. We've seen many companies now, as well as academic institutions, going, gee, now that we can actually go out to patients, for example, even case-match patients with particular conditions using the iGuard platform, we can actually perform longitudinal studies, registries, and even cross-sectional studies very, very quickly. And the last area that's got me the most excited that we've started to do a lot in now is in genomic and biomarker research. And what do I mean by that? The ability for us to be able to go to a patient that's experienced side effects on a drug, go to them for a buccal swab, case match that patient with other patients that didn't experience that side effect and get them a buccal swab. Just to put it in the context, one study like that where we're looking at patients that experience side effects versus not, we're able to actually get the buccal swabs back from that entire set within 3 weeks of starting the study, as compared to 12, 18, 24 months in a registry, or potentially even longer than that. So we're looking at side effects, we're looking at drug effectiveness. So what patients are actually experience effectiveness on a product versus others. We've got some research going on at the moment in Alzheimer's disease, basically looking at elderly patients that have developed Alzheimer's disease and case matching them to patients that haven't. So a whole lot of very, very interesting stuff that becomes available when you've actually got a profile of patients that you can actually work with. So just a little bit of summary on observational research. It's clearly an area of interest. We're doing instrument development, validation, burden of illness, observational studies, genomic studies, and a lot more focus on risk communication. So kind of in summary, I think iGuard certainly for quintiles has been a success story, not just in terms of being able to access and mobilise patients, but we're changing the way, I'd like to think being disruptive about the way we conduct clinical research, and hopefully those benefits will flow downstream to the patients that got involved in participating in this to begin with. Thank you.